Thank you so much for joining us here in the Tune Marketplace, where we get ready to bring you another interview segment. And this time, we're really happy to present you with Kibwe Tavares, who's based in the UK, and he's with Netflix. And so I want to welcome you, Kibwe, this afternoon or today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this conversation, where we know there are lots of people eager to hear from you as someone working with such a large streaming service and providing so much great and brilliant content to so much of us, so many of us across the globe. There's so many people I know who are keen to hear some of the insights you may have to offer. So welcome, Kibwe.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I came to Anime Carry with years ago with one of my early short films, maybe 2013. So I know it's 20 years now. So it's kind of amazing to kind of see it growing and kind of see how it's evolved over the years.
I know, and to think that 20 years later, this is how we have to interact, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. The last time I came down, I was there in person, and we had all the screenings, and I could present to, especially a lot of the young kind of animators and stuff coming through.
Yeah, but it's just great that we're able to still connect with you. And I think one of the things that the festival has been able to do since we've gone virtual is just connect with so many more people all over the globe.
Yeah.
And it's a real pleasure, as I said, to have you here to talk with us. And I think to start, we'd like to get a little bit about your journey, because there was a lot that you did, and you started out in architecture. There's a lot that got you to where you are now. Just maybe give us a summary of that.
Okay, I'll try and give you the succinct story. So yeah, I started out in architecture probably around, I don't know how many years ago, but I started in architecture, and I was on this very interesting course that allowed me to kind of like, I was always really kind of like proficient at the 3D animation software like Maya, 3D Studio Max, that sort of stuff. And initially I was using that sort of things for buildings and web design, working on buildings, but then I started to kind of make these short films. And luckily I was at this course that encouraged us to kind of be really creative and basically make films about our architecture. And I made a short film called Ropes of Brixton, which kind of ended up being sort of like, I entered it into a film festival, Sundance Film Festival, and it made it in there. And then from then I got more opportunities to kind of work in film, and I started to kind of move away from architecture and started to kind of move to film and animation. And then through that, I made another short film called Jonah, with starring a young Daniel Kaluuya. We made it like 7 years ago. We shot in Zanzibar, and then there's lots of animation, and that was the thing that when I was working on that last time I came to Anime Carib, and that kind of spiraled, and then alongside that I ended up starting a small animation studio in London called Factory 15, and we basically made animations for commercials, for architects, for lots of different people, and that kept growing and growing and growing, and essentially the project got larger and larger and larger and longer, let's say. And worked a bit in TV and worked for the BBC. And then eventually that led me to I'm working on a project. I can't really talk too much about the project, but that led me to direct a big sort of like, I'm working on a big animated movie for Netflix. And so my journey is one of sort of like starting out doing the animation myself, then moving into directing through sort of like being an animator, and then the directing growing and kind of finding its the directing side of me, sort of like finding my voice as a director, and then kind of moving into these kind of larger projects. And that's kind of a very sort of like brief summary, but it's taken me a while. I started this I left architecture around 10 years ago. And so it's been a kind of like an up and down, quite a long process to get to where I am. And from now on, I guess it's just continuing. And now on, I continue to work on a mix of animation as well as live action projects. I like to work between the two industries. There's not only animation, it's all of my live action work actually has animation and VFX inside it too.
And that's the impression that I get, that there are a number of skills that you were able to develop and bring to bear on your work in animation over the years.
Yeah.
What do you think, apart from those skills and covering a range of skill sets, what do you think allowed you to move through the space over the past 10 years to get you to where you are, in addition to the things you highlighted?
It was mainly the skills I had, one, but it's also the fact that like I didn't really wait for for example, when I finished architecture school, we had made our short films. Me and some others, some close collaborators, kind of put our project together. We started a company, Factory 15, and we never sort of waited for it to happen. We were always making our own content. We were always kind of trying to put our own ideas out there. We were trying to kind of make our own stuff. And for me, that was really important in trying to kind of like sort of like break my way into the industry, because I was coming from a point of an outsider. And then once you're in it, you actually realize that loads of people are outsiders, but you need to kind of have a seed of something. You need to have something to kind of build onto. So part of that for me was never sort of like being like, let me wait until, let me just make my own things, because let me just kind of make my own work, and let me sort of see how I can get my work out there. And I use like online platforms like Vimeo and things like, for example, like they've got a thing called staff picks or pick of the day. So they've got a few sort of selections, and then when like they have a basically they kind of select short films to go on their platform, and they highlight them and they push the artist's work. And my one of my films, or a few of my films, made it to kind of the Vimeo staff picks, and then that allowed loads of people around the world to see it. Then it kind of like got its own, generated its own buzz. So I think my main thing beyond sort of like my own skill set was also just like the idea of like trying to get my work out there. We also collect blogs of our work that people could kind of check, and then from keeping the blogs, it meant that people could kind of see what you're doing. So even before the work was finished, people could track what you were doing. They could track and they could follow. Sometimes it was technically driven, and sometimes it was just like, I've been thinking about these, or sometimes it might have just been photographs I was working on. It feels quite old school now, the idea that we have blogs, but I don't know. So we just had like our work. We just basically like presented essentially, like for me, like the big shift in animation from, I guess, from my generation was being able to kind of put your work out there on the internet and people around the world to be able to see it. And then that actually ended up kind of bringing me opportunities from outside, from within the industry as it was, because I wasn't necessarily like me. I wasn't scared to. I wasn't just only. And then beyond that, it allowed it to kind of travel to festivals. So I first met Camille. We were both in Nigeria at film festival. So I remember screening my work there, and then we started talking, and that's actually how I got involved in anime career. And this was 2011 or 2012, so a long time ago. And just that thing of keeping it going and keeping it going, because you do get thrown up a lot of like barriers or things that you need to kind of work through. And yeah.
So now that you're on the other side, Kibwe, if I could say that, you're on the other side of the industry, what would you
Oh.
say are some of the key what would you say are some of the key things that buyers are looking for, given that there is so much content to choose from? What do you think would make someone stand out in this climate?
For me, it's really like, it's about sort of like, I think people are looking for people with like unique voices and their own stance and stuff. So will I work that like, and work that sort of can stand out. So I think you need to like, I think there's not too much value in sort of trying to chase like a particular type of thing, because also like films and especially animation take a really long time to make. So but if you sort of try to chase a trend, by the time you finished or the time you made that, the thing might have shifted. So the only thing you can really do is like kind of trying to kind of make stuff that speaks to who you are as a person, who you are as a creative, and just and get it out there. So I think for me, like, because I'm not like, in terms of my projects are like currently I'm at Netflix. I'm working on a project that they developed, and they sent me. It wasn't necessarily an original idea of mine, but I do have original ideas that I'm working on with studios. Um, Whereas, and I think quality and like sort of like, and I think there's a big push now for kind of like to kind of like have a bigger depth and like more breadth within stories, because I think people have kind of like are actually looking at. So I think actually now, in terms of diverse stories or stories from like all over the globe, I think people are much more open nowadays than they probably were in even in recent years in the past. So I think, I don't know.
And, no, continue. Sorry.
I was going to say anything like people are really like looking for like original ideas and original kind of stories that feel like they're authentic and they're from is the idea is what people I think at the minute are looking for, at least what they say they're looking for. So I think, but I would try and like, I think really people mainly look like, because I'm a director, right? So people are looking for like people with a unique point of view and stuff, as opposed to like in general not necessarily kind of selling my product as it were. I'm generally looking for, I tend to kind of write things, and they tend to be based around either like life experience or like things I want to talk about, and then that becomes the kind of the idea, and then it might kind of get taken on as a treatment, I might get taken on as a script, or might get taken on as a like something you expand from a short form or a film that you might make.
Do you think that Caribbean people, there's an advantage for Caribbean people in terms of the diversity thrust, that there is more space? I mean, you mentioned that people are certainly more open to receiving different voices and hearing different stories. I'm just curious as to whether you think there may be an advantage for Caribbean studios.
I think there potentially could be at the minute because I think there's an overset. There's like for example, sometimes there's a tendency to kind of repeat types of stories. Like for example, like even Disney, some of they're like um, I think that there is potentially an advantage because I do think people are looking for new stuff, but I do think um, it has to be quite like because I do think like well, I think two things. I think that obviously you have like the content you're making from the studios, but you have like but I think it needs to be story driven and it shouldn't necessarily be like this is what Netflix are making now. Just because I think that like animation does take a while, and so by the time you've made that thing, and also I don't think you necessarily need to kind of you need to kind of have something completely finished to sell it as it was. I think you can also like pitch ideas or treatments or that you could write a script. It doesn't need to be like you don't need to sort of like complete your animation to kind of like get it commissioned. You can sort of like have something that is a well thought through idea that you can maybe take them if you're talking about trying to kind of sell ideas or trying to pitch ideas. You don't necessarily have to because I think sometimes there's the idea that like you need to sort of completely finish what you're doing and like be completely solid on it. And I think that's true to a certain degree, but I think actually if you are really solid on the concept of what you're doing and actually some of the stuff that buyers are looking for, they also want to they don't just want to be like the money as it were. Like you're still dealing with people, you're still dealing with like creatives, even a lot of the team at Netflix, the executives are creative, so that they want to kind of like be part of the development of the show. So it's not, I don't think you always have to kind of have a complete thing that you don't want to let someone else into. Sometimes I think there's value in sort of saying, okay, cool, we've got this idea, we've got this is where we want to take it, and like try to kind of flesh it out as much as possible, but also being open to the fact that if you're trying to sell something, whoever's buying it, they're going to want to be part of the process as well.
And how important is it to pay attention to trends? Because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people who want their work to get out there maybe try to capitalize on or become part of. You know, if something is trending or trendy, you know, you find yourself maybe wanting to, you're tempted. There is a temptation to sort of adopt that in order to be seen or noticed. What do you think about that?
I think personally that hasn't necessarily worked. Like my approach is slightly different. My approach is like I think the problem with like trying to kind of be to be on trend. I think you end up being behind the trend in a sense. I think you need to try and be like honest in a sense. So if you've got a project that's like you've been burning at the story you've been they've got like a burn desire to tell, or an area that you want to work in. I think it's better to chase that rather than chase the trends, as it were. Because I think trends are always going to shift and always going to change. And I think if you're always chasing a trend, especially in animation, as I sort of saying a bit earlier, that if you try and chase a trend, because animation is quite slow, like you have to think that like any big movie, any big animated movie, like Hollywood sort of scale, has probably been worked on for like 4 or 5 years prior to that. So if you try and chase that trend, you might sort of end up being behind the trend by the time you actually make your thing. So I think it's important to kind of like do stuff that's honest and true to kind of like what you believe in and like the stories you want to tell and like stuff that you feel like you can execute and do well as opposed to trying to chase something that's outside of you.
And do you think there's value in shopping around your work to, you know, a wider audience, perhaps instead of maybe trying to go for the big guns from the get-go? I mean, you know, ambition is a great thing, but is it sometimes, you know, maybe too much pressure to put on oneself to try to get the attention of the big buyers before maybe, you know, taking your time up the ladder, so to speak?
Yes and no. Let me try and answer that. So I think that like let me try and find my words one second. I think that there is value, obviously, like you know, like within the big company, there's like resources a big thing. But I do think it's best to try and when you start working for one of those, it's best to sort of be like feel confident in what you're doing first, so you can navigate that too, because you don't want to go somewhere when you haven't quite got a grasp on what you're trying to do, and you're trying like. So I do think there's value in sort of like even sort of like trying to get your work out there. Like in a like my sort of story is one of I put my work out. My first shorts I made by myself, and like then I had my own studio, and then from that, and then only now I'm sort of with Netflix or working with Netflix on this project. So I took a bit of time to kind of build up to it. And I think for me, I do think it's advantageous because I think that like once you sort of know yourself as an artist or as a creative or as a as an animator, somebody trying to put work out in the world, um, I think it's stronger if you sort of like had time to kind of understand who you are or like what type of work you want to do before you get pushed and pulled in too many directions.
And Kibwe, before we wrap up, is there any additional advice? You've already given some pearls, I think, to those viewing this, but is there any additional advice you'd like to give to youngsters in particular?
So youngsters in particular, we've got a really young guy from Trinidad actually on our team, a storyboard artist,
Ah,
and he blew us away because we like our team's quite large in terms of like we've got some storyboard artists from all over. Some people have worked on some of the most incredible animated films, and he's one of the younger artists in the team. But he blew us away. He was super passionate, and what blew me away when we interviewed him was that he's a storyboarder. He basically had already been doing his own work. He basically putting his own work out there, and he had been like mentoring sort of younger story artists. And so basically, he'd been kind of putting his work out there. He'd just been sort of like doing what he could do. He wasn't necessarily waiting for the opportunity to come along. He was already kind of like doing his own work. He had his own Instagram, and he's got loads of work out there. And I remember sort of when we were sort of blown over by his sort of like passion when we met him. And so like I was like, so he wasn't necessarily waiting for the opportunity to come along. He was doing it anyway. So like whether we got to him maybe first, but like whether we got to him, someone else was going to find him because he wasn't waiting for someone to kind of like to give him the thumbs up to say you're good enough to go. He was doing everything himself to say, look, let me just get my work out there. Let me try my work, and also everything I'm learning, let me sort of teach some others, and let me just find a way of like. So I would say that like don't necessarily wait to sort of like you have to just keep making stuff because if you like I don't know like if you and then like if you're an artist, if you well like you need to have like your stuff out there and just like put your stuff and don't be too scared to kind of shy to show it, as it were, I would say.
Kibwe, thank you so very much for taking the time to
No, thank
share
you.
your wisdom and your experience with our buyers, or sorry, our sellers, and
Yeah,
of course with our anime Carib community here in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing lots of great things from you in the future.
thank you. No, I appreciate it. Appreciate you. Cheers. Thanks so much.